minutes.
I just want to do a quick sound check on this. I don't know, maybe if you just want to say everybody will be beginning in a couple minutes. I don't know.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be beginning in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to let Melanie introduce me or this talk. But really, we're just doing a sound check right now for Steve. A little bit soft. Okay. Testing.
Good afternoon. What a wonderful turnout. I think we ran out of books. This is good. Okay, we're okay. Thanks. So I wanted to first of all thank you all for coming. It's very exciting for us to be able to do this on this perfect day of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. I want to, pardon? You can't hear me? Okay. So thank you for being here. You know what we've been through in the last 6 months as far as restoring the chapel and cleaning our windows. And we are very proud of our windows, very proud. So I want to welcome Aaron Frei, who is the grandson of Emil Frei, right?
Great.
What?
The great.
Great-grandson. Oh my God, I had that wrong.
No, Melanie, great-grandson.
Really? Okay. Well, Aaron can tell you more about his family. But we're really excited because we really feel that they're part of our family. We just have walked this journey together, and we are grateful for you and Anna being with us. And we're looking forward to this presentation. So, Aaron, I'm going to give it to you.
Okay. I'm going to adjust this so that we can all hear me. 1 second. Okay, can you guys hear me now? Hardly. Okay. I can walk around too. Yeah? We'll try this here. Actually, can someone maybe pin this? I can't really see.
Let me see if I can get it on this side.
I feel like I always have 100 mothers when I come to a convent.
Okay. Might as well do it right. Okay, try that.
Okay. I'm going to try and speak as loudly as I can. All right. I did teach high school boys for 4 years down in Dallas, so I can raise my voice. It was a good skill to learn. And I am number 3 out of 5. My parents had 5 kids in 5 years. So again, I know how to project when need be. Well, I want to thank Melanie, first of all, for the opportunity to come and talk to you about this. She had mentioned that she feels we're a part of her family. We also feel that about communities such as yours. When we spend so much time on your artwork, it's treasured. We know what we're working with. It's part of our heritage as well. These windows were made in my great-grandfather's time, towards the end of it. So it's something that we feel we take equal ownership in it. And because you prize it so much, and we prize it so much, I think there is this mutual connection immediately whenever we're working on these windows. So Melanie, thank you. To the entire convent, thank you. Everyone here has been so lovely to my wife Anna and myself. I'm going to be talking about a lot of things today because naturally many of the questions in any of these presentations will pertain to, well, how do you guys do this or do that? I do spend a little bit of time explaining the medium itself. So I have called this talk the Sacred Transmitted. And I say transmitted for a specific purpose. This art medium, stained glass, is unlike any other art medium out there. We are actually using transmitted light traveling through an object, rather than reflected light, such as your Stations of the Cross, such as sculptures, paintings, where light hits off of the surface of the object and comes right back to your eye. So that is also why I asked for these lights to be off. We like to view the windows in the dark. When there's light reflecting off the surface of the glass, it actually makes it seem a little bit more weak or sapped of its vitality. Okay, and I'll explain that as well. But also, I call it the Sacred Transmitted because obviously we are transmitting the holy here. This is a story of really our foundational text, one of the foundational texts in the New Testament, the Magnificat. So really, this is a way of looking anew at a very well-known scriptural passage. And that is really the beauty of sacred art, to take something and render it anew. So if you think back to that famous saying of St. Augustine, beauty ever ancient, ever new, it's about having the Holy Spirit address the old, the substance, the traditional, the core truth of our faith through the lens of modern day. Okay, so I'm going to first talk a little bit about the history of our studio because I think you might find it fascinating. But before that, I'll say I'm going to leave a lot of time for any kind of question and answer period. This will, I think, allow you to point out to things that maybe have stymied you for decades, maybe 40 years, I don't know. And I'll try my best to come up with an answer. I can't promise that I will have an answer. I'll probably talk for around 45 minutes to an hour and give you guys opportunities to pose questions to me. If at any point you can't hear me, just don't be bashful, let me know. Or if you want to ask another question on something I'm talking about, you can feel free to interrupt. As Melanie had mentioned, I am the 5th generation of Freis to be working at the studio, to lead the studio. And when I think about this, I also think in terms of this, the spirit of these windows really is providence, right? God's guiding hand, leading Mary to be the handmaiden of the Lord. bringing us Christ. I think of God's providence in my family's life equally, because there are things that my family does traditionally that are very stupid and is no reason why I should be alive today. This is one such example. This is back in the 1970s and 1980s, before OSHA was really kind of a problem for us. But here we have on the side of a church, this is around 60 feet up, 65 feet up, four tiers of scaffold with a 40-foot ladder, fully extended, scaffold boards outside of that, and at the top, my father and my grandpa, who's smoking a pipe in the picture, working on the side of this church. What you can't really see, unless you come up close to it, is that there is an iron gate down here with spikes directly beneath them. Okay, so sometimes it's a minor miracle, and I would say validation of God's guiding hand, saying, okay, I'm blessing the Frei family here so that you can do my work, because we're all still alive. This was Emil Frei Sr. I'd like to think we've gotten better looking over the generations, too. Well, we definitely know how to use a razor better now. But he was the one that founded the studio. He studied artwork in southern Germany at the Munich Academy of Fine Arts. Pretty much from the late 80s to the early 1890s. At that time, Germany was heading in a very fascist direction, and Emil Sr. was a pacifist. And they also were requiring all young men to be for mandatory conscription. So you would have to serve, I think, at least 2 to 4 years in the military. Now, naturally, a pacifist artist wielding a gun is not the best idea in the world. So he actually fled Germany in order to avoid this conscription, which was punishable by years in prison. While leaving, he took his fiancée with him, and they landed in New York and then headed out to San Francisco, where they had their first son, Emil Jr. And I promise this all will get to a point. They had their first son, Emil Jr. Now, part and parcel of any new immigrant into a nation, you deal with homesickness, a feeling of isolation, and that was no less true for Emma Frei, so Emil's wife. She could not speak English very well, and then they had their baby boy in San Francisco, and she looked around and she told her husband, there are not enough Frauleins in this city good enough for my baby boy. We need to head back to Germany. Now, naturally, he did not want to do this because that meant he would have to probably go to prison, or at least face the risk of it. And so on their way back to Germany, they stopped in St. Louis to visit some friends. They get off the train, and this is a common story, they hear nothing but German being spoken. And then Emma said, you know what? I think we could do it here. I think we could live here. And Emil Sr., that's all he needed to hear. He said, great. He started his studio within the next 6 months. And that's how we came to St. Louis. So Emil Sr. Would lead the studio for another 30 years and hand it off to his son, Emil Frei Jr. It was under his tenure that these windows were made. Okay? And Emil Frei Jr. was one of, if not the biggest pioneer in sacred art in the liturgical, the modern liturgical movement. So he was great friends with Saarinen, helped establish Cranbrook with Saarinen as well, good friends with Guillaume Abata, Buckminster Fuller. Charles Eames actually worked for my great-grandfather as well. He was kind of a protege of Emil Jr. So big, big name, and you guys are just so blessed to have had created or constructed a building right at this time. Because this was just one of my favorite eras of liturgical art and architecture. Like I said, we are 5 generations. All of us start at a very young age. I was 11 when I started. And of course, every young kid starts off doing the nastiest work in the shop, which is waterproofing the windows. Your hands get incredibly mucky, and it's very much not pleasant work. And that's how you weed out your future laborers, the ones that will take over the studio, and those that will go on to other avenues. So I was the oldest boy. My younger brother, Glenn, lasted 2 days. Thankfully, my youngest brother, Nicholas, has joined us too, and he's kind of the engineering mind. My 2 sisters also work with me. So when we call this a family business, we really mean it's a family business. This is my dad here. This is my Uncle Dave, who actually just passed away 2 years ago, and my grandpa, looking very stern, but who was the silliest guy in the world. This is part of him just posing, and then me at the bottom as a freshman in high school. This is Francis Deck. This is the individual who made your windows, or designed your windows. He happens to be one of the greatest artists in our studio history. He was also, I hope this helps, one of the very sweetest men we have ever encountered. I got to know Frank a little bit. I was starting out in 1991. In 98, Frank had a stroke way through a project. And so his son, Tony, and I kind of finished that. But he was the sweetest guy in the world. Lifelong Catholic. He also did the windows at my and Anna's church back in Kirkwood, where he was a parishioner. And when I showed Anna these windows, your windows, she said, "Oh, that looks a little bit like St. Peter's. Was that Frank Deck?" I was like, "That's right." He had a very signature style. That's him as a 15-year-old boy. I show this picture because he started at the studio when he was 15 and worked up in our studio until his death. And that is a common story within our studio. We've had probably 10 to 15 employees start in their teens and work up into their 80s. That's how we like it. Now, when I usually talk about sacred art, especially to younger crowds, high school students, they often think of something like this, of our studio being a bunch of good little monks at our tables, just with wisdom raining down upon us, and the pen kind of guiding itself. Because this is what a lot of times the movies tell us, or even Caravaggio tells us. The angel whispering into the evangelist's ear. But what I like to tell them is that this is more what it's like. And this is just one of my favorite quotes, too. It's from Chuck Close. "Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. All the best ideas come out of the process. They come out of the work itself." And that's not to say that prayer doesn't have a very active part in our vocation. It certainly does. But anyone who has trod even a little bit down that spiritual road towards maturation understands that you go through struggles. That is through the struggles that really the growth occurs, right? And so in our studio, we find often that every time an obstacle appears, immediately it seems like, oh gosh, this is the worst thing in the world. And yet, almost every single time, it's a better product at the end. It really challenges you. And I think a lot of people will understand this, especially for those of you who have worked in art. Now, the material is one of the things that really make this medium so beautiful. We use mouth-blown glass. All the glass you see in here is not machine-made. It's actually made for us in large sheets, almost strictly in Germany, France, Poland, and a little bit of yours is from Belgium, with very small amounts coming from Milton, West Virginia. But this is art in and of itself. And I could spend, and I have spent, an hour-long presentation on the process. I'm going to reduce it to 2 minutes for you. Glass at its base is silica, sand, right? And how you produce glass is you heat it up to around 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. At that point, it becomes this taffy-like material. I don't have a good picture of that here. And then you stick a long pipe into this taffy-like material. You collect what's called a gather. It's just a small ball at the end of the pipe. And then you slowly begin to blow into that pipe. And that ball starts to expand, kind of like filling up a balloon. And then you start you get on a raised platform and you start swinging that pipe, which then stretches that balloon out more into a cylinder. Once it's in this cylinder shape, they let it cool a little bit, and then they'll take some scissors and detach it from the pipe. Now you have a cylinder. How do you get from a cylinder to a flat piece of glass? They'll actually take just a glass cutter, same thing I use, I was using, and they'll score along the length of that cylinder, and then they'll put it on a tray, back into an annealing oven, and it starts to heat back up, and they'll take a hoe, just like a garden hoe, and unfold along that line where they scored it, and it flattens out to a flat sheet. We had the opportunity to go over to Germany to our producer and watch this whole process. It is fascinating. But one of the first and foremost questions we receive is like, well, how do you put the color in the glass, Aaron? And I say, I don't actually put the color in the glass at all. When we order these sheets, they come to us with these certain colors. It's actually the metal that they put in with the silica which produces the color. Okay, so if you look at your windows here, the red in your windows is actually our most expensive glass to order because gold is thrown into that silica base, and when the sunlight containing all the wavelengths, all the color of the spectrum, when the sunlight passes through that particular metal, the metal will trap every other wavelength of light except red. So cobalt will trap every single wavelength of the sun except blue, which is also why if you put your hand up onto a piece of this glass after it's been in the sun for 2 or 3 hours, it is remarkably hot. It'll actually burn you if you try to leave it there for like 2 minutes. I usually around 30 seconds because we're doing some repairs up there. It is remarkably hot. But it's that metal which produces the color. And when we produce a little bit more elaborate designs, we're actually just including, I would say 90% of the time, black metal oxides. And then we can also use brown and a little bit of yellow, which is the silver nitrate. So that alone will tell you that this is kind of a different object. Now, I had explained a little bit earlier that, let me go through here. Oh, there's also different textures which can be done too. I'll point out a couple, which some of the sisters, due to my dad and my employees being here, might have explained. There are some glasses that have a lot of air bubbles in them. These bubbles, they're actually the product of a potato. Yeah. So when they're heating up the silica in a vat to 2,500 degrees, they will throw a potato, just an ordinary potato, into the vat. That potato has some moisture in it, right? And when it reacts to that extreme heat, it creates a spontaneous explosion. And that explosion creates air pockets in this taffy, this silica, this taffy-like silica. The material of the potato burns away, but those air pockets remain. And you have a lot of that kind of glass in here. Also, interestingly, when I cut this glass, or when I used to, and then I break it, you have a strong sulfuric smell that doesn't occur in any other glass. It's from the potato. It's residual from the potato. So my sister always knows when I'm cutting the sham glass because it does get a little stinky. Sometimes, well, I'm not gonna. Sometimes she claims it's me, but I don't. By using a variety of textures, and this is what I love about mouth-blown glass, you can appreciate the exterior environment as well, right? I know there's a pine tree out there. I love how it interacts with the glass. On some pieces, without that pine tree there, you can't really notice all those air bubbles. But when you line yourself up with a pine tree with some exterior contrasting figure, then you can notice those bubbles. Because the flat sky, there's nothing to compare that glass to. So that's why a lot of times churches will cut down all their thin trees that are outside. I'm like, no, let's keep them up. I think we'll see what the windows look like first, because they're always fearful it'll block it out. But it's also that change in the background that gives a little more dynamism to it. And this is same here too. This isn't green glass, this is clear glass, but these are just beautiful live oaks outside the window. And as you move, you get that play with the texture. This is a good example. So it's from the outside, the glass looks dark, right? Because it's transmitted light. You're viewing it right now from the brighter side. It's similar to, like, if you're walking down a street during the day, you can't see inside a house, right? Right, because there's no light on inside the house, and it's all light on the outside, and it's reflecting. At nighttime, that light scenario reverses, all the lights on the inside of the house, and you can see clearly straight into the living room. So that's also why it looks black from the outside during the day. But I was talking about nature and how it interacts with the texture of the glass. This is that same garden viewed from the interior. So you can see how much, so this piece that I was, the slide was showing is right around here. Whoops. I work in the 15th century, so there we go. Nope, that's not it. There we go. So this is what those trees look like viewed through that piece of glass. So it's just a lovely thing. And this is different from rolled glass. This is America's contribution to the stained glass industry. Rolled glass is machine-made glass, hence it's much cheaper, which is also why it is, I think, more common to find in residential houses, right? Churches have more of a collective budget, a larger budget to get the finest materials. So this is not a window we did, just to let you know. But the difference between this and the mouth-blown glass is remarkable. This is more akin to a lit wall painting, whereas these are more windows. So, and I think that's really important note to make with stained glass in sacred spaces, is that our faith, we shouldn't be blocking out the exterior world. We're meant to take Christ out into the world. Go, you are sent. Ite missa est, that's where we get the word mass. You're sent. So having some recognition of that exterior world, and yet a little bit of a screen, right? We are in a holy place. So it just kind of, it gets those little fine points just right. The painting process is actually a little bit different than a lot of what people think too. This is nothing like painting on a canvas. It's not oil paints. We don't paint with anything organic. If we painted with anything organic, the sun would break down the material within a couple years. So we paint with metal oxides. So basically like finely shaved rust, and we mix it with water to make it soluble, and then we add some gum arabic to make it temporarily stick to the surface of the glass. At that point, so we kind of coat the entire piece, and then we take away from that coating to reveal the glass or the light. So it's kind of like working in reverse, like a sculptor. We're coating the piece of glass, usually, and then taking away, and that's how you produce images. Once we get the paint to around the direction or the area we want, we'll then put it into a kiln, so just an oven, and we'll fire it to around 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. At that point, the glass just starts to melt, and then you let it cool. It slowly cools, and then the metals are trapped in the surface of the glass, right? So you can actually go up, and if you had one of these windows quickly accessible to me, I do this, sometimes I learned this from my dad. I'll take my keys out and go up to the most intricately painted piece and scratch as hard as I can. And yes, yeah. Okay, so I also learned from my dad that when you do that, have someone positioned behind the pastor in order to catch him as he faints. I'm not kidding you, it was a close call one time. So basically, this is what a window looks like prior to painting. Just kind of big blocks of color. But you can kind of see the image there already. And we use all sorts of different techniques when we're painting. A lot of your windows, this was an era while airbrushing was very much in vogue. So Frank used the airbrush a lot on this too. He used a lot of heavy stippling as well. My grandpa's favorite paintbrush was actually a toothbrush. He would just get it wet and then spritz to make a halftone, and then he could spritz heavier to make a heavier halftone or shading. Drove my grandma nuts. The toothbrushes went missing in their house. Let's see. One of the nicest things about stained glass, and you've noticed it in here for sure, is the way that the light streaming in here can utterly change the space. Like, it gives it an aura that you can't provide. Like, even if you tried to have lights project it, you can't. And part of that reason too is because you're using something natural, namely the sun, and it's always changing, right? So it's especially, like, of course during the day, but also during the seasons. You'll notice, like during the winter when the sun's a lot lower, that it's a much different effect than in the summer while the sun's a lot more farther north. Sometimes in the winter it can be a little bit piercing, I imagine. And that's really one of the great things about stained glass. Another great thing is that it's got this quality that when you do reverse those color, the light source from daytime to nighttime, so this is a window during the day from the inside. And I noticed this on, what was it, Thursday night we showed up? We were passing down, and the lights were in the chapel, in the chapel. We were going down that hallway, and I was like, oh, Anna, look. And we could see the glow of these windows from the opposite side of the courtyard. And it was marvelous. And we actually intentionally do that now with many of our projects. So this is one we just installed for St. Louis University's hospital. This is that same window, but from the outside. So we actually flooded the opposite facing wall in order to turn the whole chapel into a light box, because they're on Grand Avenue, which is a major avenue in St. Louis, and they want everyone to know this is a Catholic hospital. This is, the chapel is at the heart of the campus. And that's why we spent a lot of time kind of honing in on this perfect formula. Color is one of the things that a lot of people first notice in any stained glass window. I think we think stained glass and we think color. And that's a great thing, but it's also a nuanced thing. So color is, my dad likes to say there's no such thing as an ugly color, just as there's no such thing as an ugly note. However, there are bad combinations of notes and bad combinations of colors, right? And this would be a good example of that. When you have just one end of a spectrum represented, it can be very aggressive. And so I have down here not an Emil Frei job, okay? So everything else I'm showing you is pretty much Emil Frei. But this is almost, from a distance, it's kind of like alluring. It's like, whoa, that's a lot of color. And you look at it for 5 seconds and like, okay, turn it off now. That's just too much. And it's because they did not understand the nuances within the entire color spectrum. To achieve a beautiful window, you need to use all your notes, but in proper proportion. And this is why this window invites you to look at it longer and longer, because it's using expertly the gray palette, just like your windows do. These windows were done at really the peak of grayness in stained glass. The 50s, 60s, and 70s used organic colors, gray palette, better than any generation before or since, in my opinion. And that's what really gives punctuation to those bright spots, those reds in this window, the holy, holy, holy window. That is being set off by all that gray background. The green in the, he has cast down the mighty from their thrones, or which one is that? Yeah, he has shown the strength of his arm. Back here, those pop so well, and as do the crowns, the golds in the crown, because of that gray palette. It's similar to imagining like a fine piece of orchestral work or a symphony. You have those quiet moments, right? And then you have a crescendo, and then you have another quiet moment. And so if that gray color, those are those quiet moments that really give rise to those colors. Oh, and the other interesting thing with a lot of, if you go to some more traditional churches, they will, color is also selectively used according to which face or which direction it is facing. So in traditional architecture, especially in France, the east-facing window will always be in blue. Therefore, it's always Marian. The west-facing will always be red, Christ. Why is that? It's because the evening sunlight is much redder because of all the atmospheric dust that's been kicked up. The sun's traveling through it. Our sunsets are, brilliantly red. So doubling down on that red kind of wavelength of light, we use the red wavelength in the west-facing rose windows. Once that dust has settled and the sun comes back up in the morning, the wavelength of light is much bluer, much cooler. And that's why we kind of capitalize upon the east-facing being blue. Most churches done prior to 1930 will follow this. I'm going to skip through a couple. Let's see. It's only 2:30. I'm doing good. Color is also symbolic. So this is from Chartres Cathedral, and Frank actually understood this quite well. The cross is almost always green in Gothic depictions. Why? It's because it's the tree of life, correct? Yeah, so they wanted to depict, I mean, obviously green, life go hand in hand, always have. And to take that color and to conflate it with Christ's life-giving sacrifice. I think that's just a beautiful thing. I'm going to skip through a couple here. Okay. Oh, I like this one. So, this is my favorite section to talk about, and it actually applies very well to this. Symbolism and composition. We often think about sacred art in your kind of traditional didactic manner, where, where like a figure of a saint, okay, that's St. Anthony of Padua, or that's St. Rita Cascia, or so on and so forth, right? Or you see a book and you interpret that, okay, that's scripture, 1 equals 1. But in our studio, especially during this era, we liked to really challenge the audience, play with the idea, be a little bit more philosophical. It's more poetry than prose, I guess, during this era. During the early 20th century, it was a little bit more beautiful prose. So that's when the Munich style was very popular, and I think one person mentioned in Charleston, I think that was it, right? So the Munich style was this very lifelike depiction of figures, of saints, of Christ, life of Christ, of especially Marian theology was very popular at this time in 1854. You had the Immaculate Conception in 1950. You had the Assumption, the dogma of the Assumption being declared. So you have all of this Marian fervor too. So she was a very popular, always has been obviously, but especially during this era. So this is called Munich style. One of these faces would take an artist, and still does, around a week and a half to 2 weeks to paint. All right, to do this style today is around $2,000 per square foot. All right, so I am constantly giving appraisals for churches with this amount of stained glass and around the $10 to $30 million range. And there's a lot of reasons why we don't do Munich style anymore. That's a big one. The cost is just phenomenal. But that's not the reason I'm showing this. This is St. Thomas Aquinas. He's up in the Alps at a church called St. Francis de Sales in St. Louis. This is where I learned to serve Mass myself. So he's tucked away, actually, right next to this window, right here. And you don't really notice a lot of the windows. Like you can appreciate the composite whole, but when you look at it individually, you start to uncover things. And this is why I think the Frei family is always, even during the Munich era, we always had like a little fun. Like we like to hide little Easter eggs in the windows. So St. Thomas Aquinas, often associated with the Eucharist. If you look at his chalice, you'll notice something. It's the reflection of the church. All right. For those in the back who can't see it, I think this is being taped, right? Yeah. But you'll see that that same aisle is reflected here. Not just any typical aisle, but that same exact aisle. So now you have this beautiful conflation, right, between this idea of your ecclesial body of Christ, the church building, and the sacramental body of Christ. And it's by participating in the Eucharist, in the body of Christ, that we come together as the body of Christ, ecclesially speaking. I spent 30 years at this church, served Mass in this area, never noticed it until I had to clean this window around 2010. And it just blew my mind, and I had to share it. So I use this all the time for a talk. So that's that same aisle. And other stuff. So this is actually a window we did, was it 3 years ago? And it's just a simple depiction of Saint Therese of Lisieux, the little flower, and her parents, Louis and Zélie. The Easter egg here is interesting. It's actually in the halos. So Therese's mother, she was a lace maker. And so her halo, the decoration on the halo, is very lacy, lace quality. And we bought some lace just to make this halo. And then her father was a watchmaker. So his halo has this gear shape emanating from it. Saint Therese, a little flower, obviously her halo is some lilies. But we did this for a college campus, and we wanted to just spark that interest in young people especially, because we're making these windows for people of all ages, right? From little kids, who I will say would love these windows, to teenagers, to adults, to our senior members, right? It's for every generation. And by including it, I'm going to go through, this is one that little kids love. And they actually get it a lot quicker than most adults. We were asked to do some windows on parables. But this is only 6 feet, 7 feet tall by 3 feet wide. That's really hard to do, to condense a story, a parable, into one image. And this is my grandpa thinking here. So I give usually the students around 10 seconds. The quick ones will get it immediately. And the adults have a very hard time deciphering this parable because they're not looking at it in the same way. But in the bottom left-hand corner, you see a camel, right? And then a rich man, a king, sitting on it. And then you see, it takes a second, but there's actually the silhouette of a needle. All right? So now you have the path, right? So it's easier for a camel to get into the kingdom of heaven than for a rich man. Or, I'm sorry, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Heaven being depicted by the mystical rose. So it's about reimagining those traditional stories and putting it into image. And that's why, we're working with an infinitely deep subject matter here. God. There will never be a shortage of good sacred art so long as you seriously and prayerfully approach it. That's why the worst sacred art out there is work that is not done prayerfully, is not studying its subject, or is more of a reflection only of the artist itself, right? The artist brings himself, herself into this artwork naturally, but really the gaze has got to be upon God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Everything else will flow from that. I'm going to have to pass through a bunch of these. Architecture and art is another big one that I talk about. But let's see, it's 2:47 right now. Two to four, okay. So let me talk a little bit about this. Let me go back. Okay. Melanie's given me her blessing, so I want to talk about one more window. This is at St. Meinrad's Arch Abbey in Indiana. We were asked to do windows on the Rule of St. Benedict, all right, in their chapter room. So the room where all the monks come to meet for their reflections and sometimes their prayers and disciplines. But one of the rules in the Rule of St. Benedict is obedience. And how do you depict obedience in a very simple image? And we use the image of a sunflower. It's a heliocentric plant. It will turn its head towards the sun as the sun traverses the sky. So it's always obedient to the source of light. That's why we went with that one. And the whole of that chapter room has clever symbolism like that. Now, I've talked a lot about other windows. Let's talk a little bit about yours. And all these principles we've been kind of discussing, especially on symbolism. I'll just kind of look at a few of my favorites within here. Well, there's not a bad one. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go, I know it's kind of hard, but this one is really a lovely one. So, he hath put down the mighty from their seats and hath exalted the humble. At first, there seems to be a little bit of chaos going on, especially in that bottom left-hand corner, or maybe the bottom third, bottom half. So, in the upper left, for those of you who have not really studied these windows before, so he's put down the mighty from their seats. Okay, so you have an Egyptian, so namely Pharaoh, and I love the frogs and the locusts depicted in there as well as the water that is depicted up to next to his face. So these are the plagues that really cast Pharaoh down from his throne and formed the nation of Israel. You have on this, again, the crown at the top signifying his might, his kingship. He is true king, that those who are posers, namely people like Pharaoh, he can easily cast aside. So in his, I guess it would be his left hand, he holds the truly humble, symbolized by a sheep. And I just love how it's looking softly up into the crook of the arm. Its eyes gaze pretty much upon the cross. The staff kind of going through the sheep. And the bottom section, though, to me is very interesting. He's almost, that right hand is almost kind of like shifting aside other symbols of power. And I think this is interesting because it also dates this window to a specific era and a specific fear, where you have the mushroom cloud in this kind of purple that you don't really necessarily see at first. But you also have these gears, this machinery that's kind of superimposed with that mushroom cloud. So kind of showing the might, but the illegitimate might of post or World War I, World War II. Yeah. So yeah, communism, fascism, and then that downward, that crown that is being thrust downward, meaning I will topple all of these regimes. But his kingship at the top, firmly stated, straight up, right? And then you also, in the bottom right-hand corner, have a money bag, that is very easy to overlook, but it's there as well. So I guess the kingship of wealth will one day be vanquished as well. The window immediately to its left is also very fun. You have, let's see, he has scattered the proud in the conceit of their hearts. Yes. Okay, this is window number 9 for those online. So are you talking about the mushroom cloud one? Or that's 10. Okay, so he hath scattered the proud in the conceit of their hearts is window number 9. You have a Cairo with 3 birds directly under the arm of it, flying directly upwards in an orderly pattern, ascending towards Christ. You have an angel there, and this would most likely be St. Michael with his sword. And then you have, in the bottom half, some birds on the bottom left, flying kind of dizzyingly in a circle, chaotically, and then an angel with some flames extending upward into its wings. So the fallen angels, perhaps Lucifer, perhaps someone else, but designating one of the fallen angels. So that idea of confounding the proud, and this is the sin of Lucifer, correct? Is that he tried to supplant God and not consider his role as emanating forth from God, as serving God. So you have that both of those, that power, that might, being scattered, and then, I guess, yeah. The 1, 2, so I'm kind of going a little bit backwards here. So that the 1 to its left is also interesting. And a lot of the symbolism you don't see at first. So the scales, for instance, so this would be window number 8. He has shown the might of his arm. You have the hand extending downwards and the scale being held in his hand. To his left and to his right, there are 2 scales. A lightning bolt emanates forth from it. You have the fiery sword of St. Michael, which drove out Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And then you have the foot, and I always thought this was the foot of God, but it actually is the foot of Mary, making reference to the prophecy in Genesis. I think it's chapter 3, verse 15. He shall strike at your heel, you shall strike at its head. So that idea of the tree of life, Mary ultimately striking the head of the serpent of Satan, and that tree of life ultimately will become the crucifix that is situated up in your sanctuary. So all these, and then again, you have the mighty being thrown down with another downward crown. The cross, the Cairo and the cross directly below the scale, again, upward, orderly, very just pleasantly situated there. But I would say we could go through all of these windows, but that would be a lot of time. Are there particular windows? So I'm going to open this up, and we can look at things. Are there particular windows? Yes, thank you. That people would have questions on, and if you wanted to tell me, I can repeat the question, and that way our online people can understand.
I think I know what it means, but I've my own interpretation. But can you talk about the different places of worship?
Oh yeah, this is a good one too. I love this. So for any architecture nerds out there, this is a fun window. Geography nerds as well. So this would be, let's see, I'm going to flip through. This would be, 1 second. The question was, can I talk about the window that says, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior, and that's window number 2 according to the booklet. In the top, so God my Savior, let's just concentrate on that. God is Savior, God is Savior of all mankind. And this idea of all mankind is kind of incarnated, is captured in the usage of architecture from around the world. So in the top, you have, it looks like kind of a pagoda architecture, but let's see. Oh, okay, so in the top, it's, according to this booklet, it's modeled after Mongolian architecture. Immediately to its right and down a little bit is a teepee, so Native American Indians. And now going under the half rejoiced on the left side, you have an African hut. In the right, underneath that, on the right side, you have like a Turkish, you have the onion dome of Eastern Asia, Russia, Turkey, very common over there. And at the very bottom, you have, I guess, a North American or just a Western European church, let's say. It's traditional steeple and cross atop it. The roots of the Cairo, or the base of the Cairo is extending down, and that church is rooted into Mount Calvary. So this is where the church is born, right? In the site of Christ on Calvary. Well, kind of, incipiently, at least. So yeah, my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior. He has his victory of the cross, which is central in that window. And with the lily that is its head bent towards kind of the intersection at the axis of the cross, that is a symbol for Mary. So not only was she there at the foot of the cross, but this is Mary singing about her Savior, maybe anticipating Christ's future, his whole reason for the incarnation. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Did anyone else have a question? Yes. Oh, number 5, yes. Okay, so, yes, was there a specific question on window number 5, or? Yes. Okay.
Like a cartoon almost.
Yeah, so this is, right, so the question is, what are the circles with the crowns on top? Okay, so let's see, for he that is mighty has done great things for me. Okay, so these are symbols of various witnesses or leaders within the church. So let's start. So obviously you have down at the bottom center, there is a priest's stole. It's kind of just wrapped around. So this is a priest's stole. This symbol within this, so you've got a crown atop of that as well. The symbol with right next to it is an incenser, so it's a thurible. So you see that kind of the bottom portion where the coal and the incense go, and then the chain goes up into that circle, the top. So I'm just going to go through this real quickly and then explain it. A lily has many different connotations. Mary, but also virgins. Also a symbol that Joseph is commonly associated with. So, but this would be virgins probably. Here you have a palm branch, so just upper right of that lily is a palm branch, which is a symbol for martyrs. Towards its right, just slightly upper right of that, is it looks like a staff, a crozier. Crozier is usually a symbol for bishops, episcopacy. To its right is a set of keys. Actually, I don't know what the crozier is for. I'm sure it's probably in this book. Is it? Okay, yeah. So the keys is usually for it's several things that can symbolize confession, obviously. So going back to the Gospel of Matthew, I think it's chapter 16, yeah, where Christ gives him the keys of the kingdom to bind and to loose sins. But it's also often affiliated with the papacy as well, or bishops as well. Up here is a flame. That could be any number of things. Okay, I guess it would be disciples upon this list. So think Pentecost. The scroll to its left is, it's got a quill of feathers, a pen quill right on it. It's kind of hard to make out at first, but that's actually a scroll, so that would be the evangelists. The cross could be any number, probably, let's see, probably apostles on this list. This is the other thing about symbols. An image can have many different meanings. So it's sometimes very important to have that initial explanation by an artist. But the two above it are a little bit easier. There's angel wings with a cross kind of in there, so that would be archangels. And then again, angels. So I guess just regular angels, So usually when I've seen this in our portfolio, it's kind of Mary's title is Queen of Angels, Queen of Confessors, or Queen of All Saints, or all these things. But that was a good question. You're kind of stumping me right now, and I don't have my glasses on, so now I'm really up the river. I guess I know Frank's eyes, and they are used elsewhere in here, but I don't think that's what he was intending, is to have those as eyes. But more so, it was because it was hard to contain the angels within a smaller circle, whereas those other, or the wings within that smaller circle, whereas the other images are a little bit easier to conflate. Yeah, yes? Oh, no, I think I was referring to the fact that the apostles might be affiliated with the cross. But I don't, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, I don't know if that would be the rationale there. The question was, what is the imagery contained in these smaller vignettes, or these smaller nuggets within this window, the circles? And I was just going through explaining as well as I could some of them. So let's see. Okay, I can focus now. The principal thought of greatness done to Mary can be expressed in an idea taken from the Litany of the Saints. Okay, Mary reigns as Queen of Heaven and Earth. Above all, as Queen of all Saints. Okay, so this would be kind of your category of different ranks, or not ranks, but different services within the kind of those canonized saints. Yeah, within the hierarchy of saints. She's the queen of angels, archangels, apostles, evangelists, disciples, bishops, confessors, martyrs, virgins, priests, and Levites. Okay, so that's what the thurible, the incensors, because the Levites were the ones who serviced the temple, the Holy of Holies. Yeah, so angels and archangels, because there's a whole choir ranking of angels cherubim, seraphim, yeah. The archangel has the sword on it. Oh, on this one. Well, these angels are actually a reference to, so in the Holy, Holy, Holy window, those angels are a reference to the call narrative of Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6. They're the first ones. That's where we get the Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus during the liturgy. Those are seraphim. They're the ones that Isaiah recounts as being in his heavenly vision in the court of God, right? And actually these seraphim, angels in sacred art, outside of kind of Gothic art, they're very much sanitized, because if you read Isaiah especially, and Ezekiel especially, angels are very scary dudes. But the Renaissance kind of destroyed this idea of angels as powerful and sometimes terrible. Not terrible, but awe-inspiring. I guess frightening sometimes. And that was definitely in Isaiah 6, where it almost scares him. It's, I'm not worthy, which at that point the coal, the angels take a coal from the fire and touch his lips, and then that kind of purifies him. Yeah. So yeah, that's a beautiful window too. And those, like I was telling someone else earlier that a lot of these colors you have to use in very careful proportion. Red is an extremely aggressive color in glass, which is why you don't see huge sections of red in these windows. This is kind of the biggest section so far as I can tell. But it is, if it was coming through, and it does kind of pass through. I was working up in that choir loft the other day, and it was powerful coming in around 8 in the morning. So yeah, you have to be careful with reds. Reds and greens, oddly enough, bright greens can overpower your eye too. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, the commission comes in to the studio, and the idea, the central notion is the Magnificat. How do you move from the Magnificat to all of the minutiae within the windows, all the symbolism, and I guess also this kind of coordinated whole? So every artist works different. Every era has been kind of different to answer that question. Basically what you do, or what I do today, what our artists do today, we go line by line. You read the passage, you reread it, you read it a third time as a whole, and then you take it stanza by stanza, and then you really research the heck out of each line. And this is why Scripture is such a great tool, or not tool, but a source for sacred art, is that you have, a couple thousand years of history. And I think that's what I love about a lot of these windows, is that, especially in the Magnificat, right? It's not just about, hey, God's doing something great for me right now. No, it's God has done great things for Israel, for our whole nation, from day one to current day, and that he will continue to do. And there's a couple of windows that even approach that. But also, to answer that question, so you do deep study, biblical study. You sometimes will, kind of, depending on the community, work with their local scholar or a theologian. That happens a lot as well. And yeah, you ask a lot of questions, and you spend a lot of time playing with ideas. I would say 90% of what we think up, we don't actually ever use in the windows. So as much imagery as you see in these windows, there was 10 times the amount that was cast aside. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so Frank was really quick in his composition. That said, just for making the sketches and the designs on this would have been probably 8 months to a year for these sketches. Not to actually paint the windows, but just for, because there's a lot going on. And then once you get an idea for a certain symbol or a little vignette within it, you then have to tie it in to the rest of that stanza, right? And Frank did that with his usage in a lot of these windows. So what is this window here? Is this window 8 or 9? With the use of darker and lighter areas. So you notice that the sheep is cradled in that lighter area, right? And the mighty, the symbols of the mighty, the worldly mighty, are contained slightly more in the darker areas. And there's several windows. It's a kind of a technique he used for many of these. So there are fields of depth, darker colors, lighter color area zones that he uses as well. And where you locate a symbol versus another one, that relationship, the massing of the window really matters too. So he was pretty quick though, because he did a lot of churches for us. Actually, I was talking at lunch the other day. If you're familiar with the St. Norbert's Abbey up in De Pere, Wisconsin, he was the same artist that did that abbey as well. But all the same, it is a lot. So yes. Yes. Okay. So it was Sister Mary Lou, right? Okay. Sister Mary Lou asked the process of, so the architect will create a space with these mullions, these dividers included, because that affects the design as well. These are each of these window bays has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 18 panels. All right. So the architect will send us the shop drawings of the space, of the framework, and Frank almost certainly had visited for this, because this is a big job to understand how the light is coming in, what direction, get a sense of the space. The volume is hard sometimes to predict just looking at a blueprint or drawing. So we do the same thing today. So we'll get the drawings and then draw everything or to scale at 3/4 inch equals 1 foot, right? So actually I've seen these designs. They're around this big for each window bay, because these are very large. Yes?
My question is about the word transmission.
Yes.
It sounds like there's layers of transmissions going on with the creation as well as this point in time we're experiencing. Can you say something about that?
Okay, can you explain that, or ask that again? Yeah.
The transmission starts with, well, I'm going to take Frank. He's got one piece, then you've got the reality that you put it all together. Now you've got a congregation who's using these. So how does the transmission, can you give me any clue with that, how that evolves?
Do they come and talk about the...
Oh, I see. Yes. Okay. So Normally, there is a central notion of an idea. Let's say your Mother Superior said we would like the Magnificat, or whomever. Then Frank would propose an idea of using kind of this. I'll break it down according to these stanzas, or I'll devote a window bay according to all of these different stanzas, these couplets, these pairings. Get approval for that, and then recommend certain symbols, and here's my plan. So usually we'll start off with a verbal description of our plan of attack, our design, and from there, after that approval, we'll do a black and white sketch. So basically a compositional study of the window, just to see stylistically, are we going the right direction? Upon approval of that, we'll do a watercolor. And upon approval of that, we will actually draft out the windows and begin the fabrication process. Does that answer? Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it's funny, the word transmission, yeah, well, anyway, that's beautiful. Yes. Yeah.
Particularly now.
Just look at it over here right now. This is just glorious.
Just look at the wall over here.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yes, Sister Marilyn?
Had an idea for that been submitted, or did Francis create those?
Well, so the question is, the window's not dealing with a narrative of the Magnificat. Was that something of Francis's, the artist's, suggestion, or was that something dictated to him, correct? To that, I honestly don't know the answer to that. Quite often we would suggest, and Frank did. He was he was also a liturgical design consultant. So it was typically, like at the Norbertine Abbey, he's the one that laid out all of the ideas, and then Abbot Killian would come back and say, no, I want this and this changed out, but I love the rest of this. So it's a little bit of a dialogue back and forth. In this case, I imagine Frank would have suggested, but I'm not sure. It's a tragedy. So our studio used to be around 70 people altogether. Around 12 years after these windows were made, we were down to 10 people. The building boom of post-war suburban life came to a screeching halt. And so the options were either to downsize or go out of business, or to pretend like it's, not happening, which would lead you to go out of business. My grandfather made a very difficult choice and downsized to 3 people. So when I started at the studio, I was the 4th person. And so now we're back up to around 15, which shows like there is at least a resurgence. But the point of saying this is that my grandfather moved out of an enormous building into a much smaller building and had to pretty much throw out all of the records prior to, yes, okay. This is the feeling I get every time I come on the phone with an archivist at the church. So I don't have all the records, but I think we might have a few records on Wheaton, but they're stored at the Missouri Historical Society. My great-grandmother, she's the only reason that those records would exist, because she got mad at my grandfather, her son, for throwing everything out. What are you doing, Bob? Let's take him down to the archives. So they actually, yeah. So sadly, most of those records are gone, though. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No pressure. You sort of segued a little bit to my question. No pressure on you and Anna, but how is your organization preparing for the next generation? And
Yeah.
do you have an apprentice program so that these beautiful skills are not lost?
Right. So basically, the succession model, or our plan of our 10-year or 20-year plans is have more babies. Is really how our studio. Yeah. Please do. Yeah. So with Generation 6 is already, there's members that are working at the studio, and each generation will naturally kind of envelop their friends, or it's providential how we've been getting all our employees. The sacred art world is tiny, and we're kind of one of those few spots where you can have a career, a full-time career doing sacred art. So we've been lucky in that a lot of people approach us. What they don't realize is that a lot of what we do is kind of mind-numbingly boring to some. Like James and Joe and my dad were literally on the side of these windows, hammering, chiseling putties, scraping it down, caulking, washing the windows. When you think, I'm going to work for a sacred art studio, that's not what you're thinking about, right? You're thinking, I'm going to be painting, I'm going to be drawing. No, most of what we do is the prep work for that. But no, so what we do, how do we attract more people? First off, I think we continue making great work. That's how we've been able to gather people in, is that people want to belong to a studio there's a spirit there still. And we have that at our studio. There's a real collegiality as well. It's relaxed, but it's also structured. And that's what we're hoping to continue. Yes? Yes, okay, this is a great question. And it's kind of why a lot of the churches, a lot of the stained glass studios have gone out of business. The question today is, contemporary architecture, are they more or less likely to use stained glass or sacred art in general? There's different trends in different parts of the country. In the Midwest, so notably Kansas and Oklahoma, Nebraska, Colorado, Texas, there is a lot of return to a traditional style of architecture. And in those cases, a lot of times their first impetus is simply what churches are being closed and how might we be able to reuse those works. Some of that is actually a good thing. You're rescuing very beautiful works of art. However, sometimes that's not a good thing, because not everything that is old equals beautiful, right? There's a lot of things that are being saved and re-implemented simply because they are old. Now, modern architecture as a whole, so I would say probably 70% of the churches being built today are in a more contemporary vein and do not use as much sacred art. So sanctuaries, for instance, that's a big or key difference between a traditional building and a contemporary building. In a traditional building, you'll have an elaborate reredos, so that structure behind the altar, usually a pretty complicated or valuable altar itself, ambo, presider's chair, so on and so forth, baptismal font, and that's usually pared down a lot more in contemporary fields. The windows are a big difference. So mid-century, this is classic mid-century arts and architecture here. They went from 20 years prior to these windows where they would have kind of either Roman top windows, so half circle tops, or Gothic, kind of that clover top. The architecture here is more steel reinforced. Let's get it up quick, but more efficiently. But also, it's a kind of this, I don't want to kind of reduce it to that. There was the notion of noble simplicity, right? So paring it down, the decorative, the craftsman style qualities a little bit more. And so you went from those kind of Gothic or round Roman top windows to rectangles. Rectangles were the thing of the day for mid-century. And so that's also because it was the engineering. You can make much bigger windows using a simpler construction or framing system. Yeah. Yes, so these stained glass windows per square foot are around 4 pounds per square foot. It depends on how much lead is in a particular section. Faceted glass, which is that thicker, chunkier glass, you guys don't have any here, but that's around 7 to 8 pounds per square foot, which was also popular to use faceted glass at this time too, because it's more architectural. Okay, so the vents they're all pretty much the same, little differences, but that's I think 30 inches by around 30 inches. So 3 feet by 3 feet is 36 by 36. It's 9 feet, so I would say 8 feet times 4. So each one of those sections around 30 to 35 pounds. Yeah, which is why the aluminum framing system there probably, yeah. So there was a lot of welding going on for these frames. In the traditional churches, that was a big Achilles heel of their architecture. It was all wood frames, and it was wood frames that used glue and nails. And so these massive windows, around 80 years after they're installed, are starting to literally come apart. And nowadays, it's so expensive to replace. It's more expensive sometimes to replace the wood tracery than it is the stained glass. Yes. Yeah. Okay, the question is, what is the material we used to seal the windows in place? So when we came up, now this is several months ago, 4 or 5 months ago, a lot of the oil-based putties were originally used to seal the windows. This kept water out, it kept cold air from being transferred, but those oil-based putties, when they were applied back in the late 50s, early 60s, were always meant to be replaced every 30 or 40 years, similar to how every building is meant to be tuck-pointed every 40 years. Well, guess what? That never happens. So the putties, the oils in those oil-based putties dried out, and they started cracking, and then they started falling off, which meant that a lot of these sections were no longer being kind of sealed in. Okay, well that's a problem because now the window can move, which will then create breaks and cracks in your panels. So we went back, we took out all the remaining oil-based putties, we cleaned it down to a pristine surface, and then we applied a neutral cure silicone, so a stretchable silicone. The same kind of, actually NASA uses this same silicone on their re-entry vehicles. So it can expand, contract, there's no lifespan known yet. Right, well, that's, so the outside, there's actually, it's got the aluminum frames, they're set from the inside. So there's a rabbeted edge, and the windows are installed from the inside. They're going up against a fixed frame on the outside. Yeah.
I have a question about your mission itself.
Yes.
As artists and as your company. So for example, if you wanted to take the Magnificat and this time put it into a more contemporary scene, do you have like templates of all these different symbols that you would not only draw from,
Yeah.
but find a way to adapt depending upon
Yeah.
the requests from the different places?
Right. So that's a good question. We do actually have kind of a catalog of images that we commonly use, but they're more for inspiration, and sometimes we find ourselves not using it because it might have come from a church that is, say, much more traditional and therefore not as relevant. Sometimes we just don't have, so we have, we're in our 128th year, or something like that, 127th. We have collected so many images over the years. And they are good resources, but you have to be careful never to use them as a crutch, right? We do not copy things. These windows are utterly unique. Everything that we do should be utterly unique, which is a little bit different from the Munich style era because they would kind of use a catalog approach. And there were valid points to it. They were doing a lot more square footage. They had to make do with that. But I think for the spirit to come across in any work, you need to approach it, I think, with eyes anew and with more prayerful consideration. But yeah, we do, I mean, obviously, there are certain symbols that you will always rely upon. You know, lily is one of them. You know, there are certain indispensable ones, like a cross. You just can't do without that, or a Cairo. But I think we also want to bring in a lot of playfulness. You know, it's so reimagine something. It doesn't like that obedience. Like there's no symbol really for obedience. So we just have to make one up, and hope that people will make it beautiful enough that people will come back and actually ponder it. And this is really the great thing about sacred art. Like when done well, it will turn the viewer into an evangelist. Because you get excited at the discovery of a nugget in there, a hidden gem that perhaps it's escaped your attention for 30 years. But you get excited about it, so guess what? You tell someone else. And that's really beautiful to see in children as well. Going back to their mom or dad, yes.
So a comment to evangelize before my question. I visited St. Louis last year, or the Basilica Cathedral in St. Louis last year for the first time. Fantastic early 20th century architecture, and the windows by Frei. Mm-hmm. So if you have a chance and you're in St. Louis, visit. It's spectacular basilica. My question is, you talked about Easter eggs that you found cleaning the windows. Were there Easter eggs that were found in here as the windows were being cleaned and repaired?
Well, I'm sure there was. I did not have the good fortune of being the one on the job site. I had the unpleasant fortune of having to come up with the costs and bill the sisters. But just in my own approach of these windows, it's I think a larger kind of nuggets. It's not necessarily a small symbol that's been tucked away. It's just the cleverness of the ideas being expressed and how those different ideas are being related to one another. Like just the window in front of me right now, and the rich he has sent away empty. Just the expression, the posture of the two figures in that window with their head kind of looking down, counting his money. But it's kind of like he's almost a slave to it. And just that utterly, that despair being shown by them. And then the thorns that are coming up into the city, into that. So just these bigger ideas that you don't initially see. Initially you see forms and colors, but really when you start putting things together, that's really the fun. I didn't really answer that question. But things, even the window to the right of that, you have certain symbols too. It's a traditional kind of Jesse tree window, where it's a tree that unfolds. So it's the Cairo is atop of this organic plant tree. This is drawing from a very traditional image of the Jesse tree. If you've been to Chartres Cathedral, it's in their front entrance. And within the folds of the vines or the branches, you have these different symbols. One is of a pyre, sacrificial fire, which would be Isaac. King David is right above that. So you have this idea of the patriarchy, of the Davidic monarchy, all being swept up into the whole history of Israel, and then Mary right below the Cairo, how she fits into that. To me, this is about just studying the windows, seeing the shapes, the colors, how are they relating to one another. That's kind of the fun discovery in this project. But I think I like the mushroom cloud.
My question is, you've touched on this a little bit gently throughout your presentation, but I'm curious to know, when it comes to sustaining the beautiful richness and legacy of your company, what keeps you up at night?
Oh. Anna can answer that question. Well, there's so many things. Honestly, one of the big ones is where are we going to find people to produce the glass for us? This is now a luxury, right? Churches aren't being built in the number and the quantity that they once were. And so you're always looking at what's the market look like, both for my supplies, but also like what's the demand. And one of the other things is, do people today, do they understand art? Quite frankly, the amount of people that I run into, and they'll ask, what church do you go to? Like in St. Louis, and they're like, I go to this one or that one. I'm like, oh, you guys have a beautiful crucifix. And they're like, oh, really? I've never really noticed it. And that is just crushing to hear that. Which is why that's one of the things that makes me worried, actually. Our schools, if you're lucky, you get art class once a week. I mean, this was for me growing up in the 1980s, 90s. We had art class once a week. Well, what does that say? It says that art's not important, right? In a lot of high schools, you can't, at my alma mater, freshmen can't take an art class. You can do it in your sophomore, junior, and senior year, but freshmen can't. Guess what? You can take as much gym electives as you want. Sorry, this is me kind of letting off some steam right now. But yeah, it's about people. It starts and ends with having an intelligent crowd who asks for beauty, really, right? Because this is not just beauty as a luxury. This is beauty as a necessity, right? This is why we have sacred music. Like this is how we come to know God. Beauty, truth, and goodness, the three transcendentals. This is one of the most convincing ways that people come to God is through beauty. I mean, who hasn't, like, the first time they've heard like a Mozart or a Bach concerto? For me, it was the Polyphony at University of Dallas. There was a Polyphony choir, and the first time I heard the Ubi Caritas, like, it just melted my heart. I'd never heard anything like that before. And that's how I think a lot of my classmates were too. So really, this is how we come to know God. Yeah, sorry.
How are these windows evaluated and insured? Who does that?
So I write a lot of appraisals. So there are two ways to appraise. So how are these windows valued and insured? I use a replacement value system. So there are two major ways of saying this is what a window's worth. One is, what can you get for it on the market, which is notoriously unreliable to kind of apply a number to. Anna and I like to watch Antiques Roadshow. We are, yes, that couple. And she can tell you that I have a love-hate show with that relationship with that show, because they will tell them of a market value. That's usually what they'll say. This is what you can get at an auction, right? And I look at this object and I tell Anna, it's worth 10 times that amount to actually make today, right? So when I make an appraisal, I use replacement value. What does it take to remake today? Because that's what a church needs to know in the case of great damage to their windows. And on something like this, I will take a per square foot estimate and then apply the amount of square feet to it. So I use replacement value, market value. It's very hard to reuse stained glass windows. Namely, you have to find a new church being built who can accommodate the size and scale and number of these windows, who secondly wants that content, that specific content of the Magnificat, who thirdly wants this style, right? Because a lot of churches would say, well, this is not going to fit our vision of the architecture. Who is willing to put forward money in restoring the windows too. So it's just so hard to move windows into a new home. Also because these windows were designed for this space. Like basically to reuse these windows, you would have to rebuild this space. Yeah, that's the shame.
Jeannie, wait a minute. Jeannie, wait a minute, please.
Is there any thought given to a museum or museums that would house? I hear what you're saying about the space, but just to preserve these incredible works of art.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. So for those who couldn't hear, is there any possibility of a stained glass museum? And the answer to that, it's been tried, but never really quite successfully. The amount of wall surface that you would need, it makes it extremely difficult. Now, then a lot of art museums will say, fine, we got a way around that. We'll make a light box behind it. It will not look the same. If you tried to put a light box behind these windows, I would rather see these windows in crates than in a light box. Just because I think it would do such a disservice to it that I would rather that, we wait 10, 20 years, 30 years, I don't care. Just don't put a light box behind it. Because that is the museum's solution. But it utterly destroys the charm. These windows were cut to be powered by the sunlight, to have certain objects in the distance where you can see the texture of the glass. So, for instance, at the St. Louis Art Museum and the Chicago Art Institute has some stained glass as well. Most of the windows in the St. Louis Art Museum are backlit and are done so poorly, it breaks my heart. Now, that's because I'm a stained glass snob. I think a lot of people will still come up to them like, oh, that's beautiful. And I just keep silent and I say, well, you don't know what it really looks like. Yeah, these are strikingly beautiful windows. I'm obviously biased, and that's why stained glass has always been it's found its natural home in churches for that precise reason. Also because the metaphorical symbolism behind light coming through a material, being transformed by the sun, which is a symbol for the logos, for Christ. I mean, all of this lends itself to a sacred setting. And I think museums don't quite understand that.
So I have to ask, what did you think when you found out that the Ten Commandments were really...
Okay, so the question is, sometimes you got to get a job out the door, right? So in one of these windows, there's the Decalogue.
Right here.
Yes, okay. And the Roman numerals, we missed, I think, what was it, window 4, we had 2 5s, right? Yeah. So it was just a straight line. I mean, come on, Frank. He was a holy man, but he had 4 or 5 kids too, so I'm sure he was rushed. Sure. Do you think he did it on purpose? No. That does happen on occasion. Or sometimes, that's why one of my jobs when I was growing up was to proofread my grandfather's work. Anytime he used words, he was a notoriously bad speller. Oh, good story. Okay, so there was one, it's another Ten Commandments story. So Grandpa was doing a set of windows for, I think it was a UCC church in St. Louis. And he was at the dedication. And the minister there was just talking about glowing terms about how beautiful the windows are. But after the service, Grandpa saw a group of people around one of the windows. And I think it was the 6th commandment. He saw them studying it and like looking at it, and he's like, "Uh-oh, this is not good." Then the minister comes over to Grandpa and says, Hey, Bob, how do you spell adultery? Well, this is the genius of my grandpa, because then he said, "Oh, Father, I'm sorry, we Catholics know nothing of that sin." So yeah, it happens sometimes. He went back and changed it, but he was good at covering over the multitude of his sins with some good humor. Yeah, so that's tricky. Was the Easter egg? Yeah, I don't know. Oh. Yeah. Any more? Oh, good. It's been such a blessing. Oh, yes, Shirley.
Is there an artist of the same quality as the man who did our art at the firm now?
Yes, we got a great one. His name is Gustavo Saavedra. He's doing, actually, Frank Duck has kind of been a big inspiration for him, just studying his works. But we're doing a window down in Muskogee, Oklahoma for a hospital that is maybe one window the size of these 4 columns. Yeah, around that. It's around 35, 40 feet long by 20 feet high. We're praying that keep your employees happy, my dad says. Just keep your employees happy. But actually, my wife and I do have to hit the road pretty soon because we're driving back to St. Louis tonight.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, well, thank you all.
So much. I so appreciate this.
Yeah. Good. Good. Well, thank you all too. It's been a great blessing being here. So thank you all, and God bless for the next 70 years.
We're going to ask you and Anna to come up. We're going to do a blessing before you leave. Franciscans, we're going to do a blessing of Aaron and Anna before they leave. So if you know our blessing, well, all of you please stand, but if you know the blessing, please join.